what I got from this visit was that Leonardo is a bit embarrassed about having to do all this military stuff. He was really a peace man, and he was a lover of beauty, he was a lover of life. He didn't want to, contribute to making instruments of death, and yet he had to for a living. And sadly, great graduates from MIT or Harvard or NYU or Stanford now are still having to go and work for the Pentagon. They're having to use their brilliant minds to invent weapons of mass destruction that they can outsmart the Russians or the Chinese with. And there's a whole new generation of weapon development going on that we the plebs, don't even really know about. Peace scholars know about some of these things, but it's still kept from us. Now, I think that's wrong, and I think that Leonardo, were he alive today, he would be trying to get peace on earth instead of militarism. So I dreamed up this idea of what I call the nonagon as a result of going to Amboise and communing with his spirit, so to speak. We had a conference in his memory. This is the desk he worked at until his death. And all I can say is that it occurred to me that Leonardo was a great peace thinker, an artist, and so why not put a top floor on the Pentagon, a 9-sided figure of a building? Why not have an architectural prize to the architectural firm that designed the nonagon? And this is an ongoing project of my Peace Institute. We want an architectural team to design it, and then we want the US presidency and the Congress to pass it in honor of Leonardo's vision, because he was the Renaissance genius. He would have known, almost probably, Amerigo de Vespucci, who worked for the Florentine Medici family before he set out on his voyages, which gave his name to the Americas. Americans, by definition, are Florentine Neoplatonists, and Leonardo in that lineage, I think, would be very proud if you could put a top floor of the nonagon on top of the Pentagon and make it house the Peace Department of America. We have the Pentagon on the ground floor, which is making all these instruments of war. Who's making the instruments of peace? Who's designing high-tech things that can resolve conflict? Who's solving the interfaith conflicts of the planet? Who's resolving wars between the Muslims and Christians of Nigeria? Who's designing high-tech translation devices that if I'm in the field, there's my friend Geoffrey Gale pointing like Leonardo's painting. Geoffrey's an artist who'd given a talk about Leonardo a few days before these photographs were taken. And we went to Amboise on a pilgrimage because it's very close to the centre here where I'm based, the Peace Museum of Europe. Okay, that's a little glimpse. I can't do more. There's one little final thing to say about the bed where he died. Because he died, he was crying. And the king who was with him, there's parts of his library that are being kept. You can see his art studio and so on. The king noticed his tears and said, "Leonardo, why are you crying?" And Leonardo was literally on the point of death. And he said, "Oh, king, I'm dying because there's so much left to do. I haven't done, there's this and that project and this one and that one. I'm dying because I've left so much work to be done." And the king looked at him and held him in his arms quite tenderly. They were good friends, right? This is the bed he died in. And he said, "Look, Leonardo, you can die peacefully because you've done more than most men. Yes, you've left stuff undone, but leave some things for other people to do." He'd done enough, he said, and at that point, Leonardo died. And my talk at the conference on Leonardo was called Leonardo's Tears. I think all of us should be able to die with a feeling that we haven't done enough. Because if we haven't tried to do more than we're capable of, then we haven't aspired to really do God's work. I mean, Leonardo was a Catholic, he was a Christian, in the best sense of the word, a universalist. He was also deeply versed in Hermeticism, pagan wisdom. He'd studied Islam, he had copies of Islamic scientific texts in his library. He was a universalist, which is actually what the word Catholic means. And he, because he aspired to so much, then of course he left stuff undone. And that's what we should all be. You know, if we die with a smug, sort of contented smile on our face, then, you know, I don't think we've been doing what we should be attempting. So somebody could say to me, oh, this Nonigan project is just a pipe dream, it'll never happen. Well, I hope it does happen in my lifetime. It certainly deserves to. It'd be a really good idea. But if it hasn't happened, I'm going to die with Leonardo's tears on my cheeks, because it will be something I haven't managed to pull off. But, you know, I'm going to do my best. There's the view from the window of the room in which he died, his bedroom. So anyway, there's my homage to Leonardo, and my pledge is that I'm going to try and get this Nonigan built. That's the window with beautiful stained glass in. You know, the thing about Renaissance culture, be it in France or Italy, and it was this king who brought Renaissance art to France, is that it celebrated beauty through the arts. It celebrated, you know, in all the different art forms. You know, and the theme of the goddess, which you see in Botticelli's paintings and Renaissance art, was in a sense a continuity from the earliest times of Troy, an old European culture that Jim Butas talks about, which I've showed you in the library of Chanakale, you know, from Troy. So that's my kind of theme really in my work, that we need to reclaim that wisdom tradition, reclaim the lost goddess at the heart of not just European but world civilization, and make her a goddess of peace, because that is what she actually is and wants. So huge amounts of stuff here. I can't share everything. The different collections made. Let me just see if I can find the trip to Ephesus, because that is a city that is still pretty much extant. Here's photographs of my trip to Chanakale. Here is Ephesus, and if you haven't been there, I recommend it. It was a city devoted to the goddess Artemis, also known as Diana in the Latin. There's an extant library. This is the foyer of a library that's still there. This is the great theatre compound. These are the sacred ways, the walkways at Ephesus. They're still there. You can walk for ages. It's in the middle of beautiful countryside. As ever in Turkey, they love their cats. So you have cats that look like my black cat, Bishy, just happily sunning themselves. Look at that amazing view in the distance. Down, it's no longer on the sea, Ephesus. It used to be, but it's moved inland because the sea's retreated. It's just unbelievable. You could spend ages here just taking it all in. Many of the great intellectuals lived there. Heraclitus was there, who, as you know, founded the concept of the Logos as the intellectual principle behind both human intelligence and divine intelligence. The Logos was his word for intelligence, the word. And when in the Christian Bible it says, in the beginning was the word, they're really homaging Heraclitus of Ephesus. Now the tradition is that St. John the Divine, who wrote that gospel, actually did so here in Ephesus. He came here and loved it so much he never left. And St. John the Divine is also present in the atmosphere at Ephesus. And so was his custodian that he was looking after, the Virgin Mary, who by all tradition ascended here Catholics believe that she ascended, died, whatever you want to call it, here in Ephesus. And Catherine Emmerich, a mystic in Germany in the 19th century, had many visions about that. But there's still, traces of the Mary tradition here in Ephesus. I see a continuity between the Mary traditions and the Diana, Artemis, goddess traditions of the ancient Trojan and Druid culture. We are one people. I don't really care what name is on the tin. It's all, it's all the same ultimate wisdom tradition. This looks to me like a Kundalini image which could be from India, the Tantric traditions. Because of course in northern India they knew all this stuff and they called it Tantra. This is the snake curling around. This is a sculpture that's found in Ephesus. I'm sure that archaeologists have written about this in great detail. We should also bear in mind that Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing, was the son of Apollo, and his symbol, the caduceus, to this day is the symbol of doctors and pharmacists and everyone that works in medicine. And in the time of pandemic, it is worth remembering that, the importance of the sacred roots of medicine. Medicine is a calling. I worked in hospitals, and as a nursing orderly, I trained in Canada. For me, it was a sacred task to help heal people or to help them through death, because I was working in a geriatric veterans hospital and people were dying. And so my job was to help make death as, peaceful and calm as possible. And I was also, at the age of about 22, responsible for cleaning the body when somebody died, and then you take them down into the morgue. That's when I first started thinking seriously about near-death experiences, where I first ever even heard of them. And I first thought, well, maybe actually, hang on, maybe the soul does survive death. Up to that point, I was some kind of existentialist humanist who thought, no, all that life after death stuff is old-fashioned, and we modernists like Sartre, don't believe in all that. But then I realised, working with these amazing veteran soldiers in Canada, that no, something does survive. And then I met nurses who told me their experiences with, anomalous phenomena, let's just call it that, near-death experiences and so on. And that made me convinced, no, actually scientifically there's something to this. And that's when I first started reading the sacred texts properly, in depth, as a scholar, reading the entire Bible, the Quran, the Jain, the Buddhist, the Sikh, the Qabalistic scriptures and so on, of all humanity, and all the Hindu scriptures. That was in my early 20s. So anyway, the pilgrimage goes on. I want to finish by just saying thank you to all my friends that made all these trips possible, and to my mother that indirectly helped make it all possible. She was also a lover of Greek culture. We spent time in Crete together. She used to go to Crete every 2 weeks, for 2 weeks every summer, for about 20 years with my sister. I always thought my mother was a reborn Cretan priestess from Minoan culture, and she probably was. So she'd be pleased that I'm helping the Delphic Games now reclaim their stature. So there's the cat at Ephesus, and it's a fitting image maybe to close with. Unless I'm tempted, just one more thing I want to show you, because this is worth seeing. Nearby Ephesus is another great city called Miletus. And Miletus was really the homeland of philosophy as well as Ephesus, and had amazing. Now there's Ephesus. Now here's Miletus. It's not so well preserved as Ephesus. But there's an amazing museum which you can go round. And being a philosopher, I'd always known about Miletus. It was where Thales came from, one of the first of the great philosophers, who said everything comes from water. And when I teach about the pre-Socratics, Thales always has inspired me. Now, what I learned from this temple, from this museum, is that not only was this great city of Miletus, incredibly sophisticated, archaeologists have been exploring it in great detail and finding its mysteries. The museum had tremendous details about all that. But look, it's Minoan in its origin. What they found, archaeologists, is that Miletus was founded as an offshoot from Crete. Now, I didn't know that before I came here. They don't tell you that in the philosophical textbooks about the importance of Miletus. But Miletus was, one of the intellectual powerhouses of the birth of philosophy. And here it tells you in detail where it came from. This is how it used to look, and they've reconstructed it as it was a to die for, amazing city, right? With unbelievable sophistication, and no wonder the intellectuals here were having a field day. I mean, what they were doing in Miletus was integrating the wisdom that had come from Mesopotamia, from the Near East. They were integrating the wisdom of Europe with the wisdom of Asia. So look, you've got influence coming in from the Middle Bronze Age. Herodotus, who came from nearby, the great founder of history, called this city the ornament of Ionia. And the great philosophers Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes are all regarded as pioneers of European philosophical thought. It had temples to Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and also to Artemis. But then, unfortunately, it was attacked by the Persian army and destroyed, and this led to all kinds of trouble because it led to the Greek-Persian Wars. And then Alexander went and conquered the Persian Empire eventually. But I think we should get back to the original wisdom of these early cities and their goddess traditions, which were living in peace. We've got to outgrow war. Here's the city. What a splendid and extraordinary place it must have been. Now there's nobody living there. It's a museum. It's an archaeological site. There is this tremendous theatre that you can go into. This is like an aerial view of what it looks like now. So anyway, I think I paid my homage to Thales and to Anaximenes. And of course it's got its wonderful goddess statues still in the museum, found in situ. And these could be from any kind of tantric Hindu site. And they're all symbols of the goddess. There was a temple to Aphrodite here. So that's the root of European and actually, in many ways, world civilization. The theatre was a very important part of these cities. The theatre was sacred to Dionysus, who was like the shadow side of Apollo, who was the god of reason, the daylight, does everything by the book. And then Dionysus comes out at night, and he does the ecstasy, the sheer joy of being human. And I think, like Nietzsche, that we should celebrate both. They're both in our nature, as Jung said, and they're both, to revere and celebrate. So I'm going to finish with a final poem and a quote. I hope you've enjoyed my little romp through some of my journeys. There's a lot more that we could share maybe on other occasions. Um, some of these photographs obviously come from Scotland, where I visited. This temple of Apollo, I want to just finish with, of Didyma. It was one of the great oracular centres of Apollo. I was privileged to visit there. And it's still universally pretty much intact in many ways. It's got these amazing columns standing. And Didyma was a place you would go to receive the oracle. This is a laurel tree that's actually inside the temple, still growing. And there's an area set aside. They know where the priestess would give her speech from, the oracular priestess, so to speak. And these were trained initiates to give these oracles. Now, I had a vision once that we should rebuild these temples. Why can't we rebuild the temples of Apollo? Why can't we have fully functioning oracular sites throughout, the former classical world, Turkey, Greece, southern France? There's even the temples to Apollo in Israel, on the coasts of Israel, north of Caesarea. What if each of these little temples of Apollo had a trained cadre of druid stroke prophetic initiates who could put you in touch with your own higher powers? That's all a prophet or a sage does. They bring you into contact with your own inner voice and your own prophetic intelligence. I differentiate between what I call the divine intelligence, which is the source, which is Apollo himself, or Zeus, or Allah, or whatever you want to call it. That's God, that's the divine intelligence. And then there's the prophet who channels that into our culture and our language and in ways that we can understand. And that depends on the quality of the prophet and their own prophetic intelligence. Plato, I think, had quite a strong prophetic intelligence. Christ had an absolutely pretty 99.9% transparent prophetic intelligence. Muhammad had a pretty clear, transmission capacity, a 99 point ability to transmit the oracular wisdom. There was a wedding going on when I visited. The people of the area love to get married in this temple. They somehow sense it's sacred, and so they want to affirm that their wedding vows should be confirmed in the temple of Apollo. Now, Apollo was also the god of healing. His son, Asclepius, could heal people. And I want to just end by saying that I really hope this pandemic will be healed soon. I think that we should be, re-invoking the inner prophet of us all, the Apollo within us all. And that's why I'm helping the Delphic Games. Let's get them restarted. Let's get, as part of it, there are ceremonies and rituals that will happen in honor of healing. The arts have a cathartic effect. And all these temples used to be places where there would be artistic events, concerts, music, and dance. And that's what we should do in not just, every 4 years at the Delphic Games, but we should be doing it all around in our lives. So I'm going to finish with a little poem about all this, because sometimes I find it easier to say things in poetry. Let me see if this one is a good one to read. Okay, yeah, I'll finish with that poem. But first, before I read my final poem, I want to share a couple of quotes from the Quran, which I've just finished my 10-year epic commentary on. And I want to share with the very last of the surahs from Mecca, which I just finished commenting on. I've done the whole thing chronologically. I had to go back and complete some of the commentaries on quotes from Mecca. This is the last of the Meccan surahs, and it's called Tatfif, or dealing in fraud. And it's Surah 83 in the classical sequence. But in my chronological sequence, it has a different number. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Woe to those that deal in fraud. Those who, when they have to receive by measure from men, exact full measure, but when they have to give by measure or weight to men, give less than their due. Do they not think that they will be called to account on a mighty day, a day when all mankind will stand before the Lord of the worlds? Nay, surely the record of the wicked is preserved in Sijin. And what will explain to thee what Sijin is? There is a register fully inscribed. Woe that day to those that deny the day of judgment. And none can deny it, but the transgressor beyond bounds, the sinner. When our signs are rehearsed to him, he says, tales of the ancients. By no means, but on their hearts is the stain of the ill which they do. Now that's the opening of this surah, and you can listen to the whole thing in my recording. But in a nutshell, I find this a very powerful surah, and I want to close with this because it's a condemnation against all who deal in fraud. You see, my view is that Muhammad was the inheritor of the collective wisdom of these ancient civilizations I've been showing you. And although his mental worldview was different, he was in a post-Christian world, he'd been strongly influenced by Manichaean and Zoroastrian teachings. He was influenced by ideas about the devil and all kinds of things that weren't really in the mind of philosophers like Thales or the early Orphic and Pythagorean and Platonic cults. They didn't think the same. But Muhammad comes later. He's very much a later prophet on the block, and he does see things in this dualistic terms. But my contention, as I've made plain in my commentary, is that he's inheriting the same energetic sort of load of downloads from the same source, which is the divine intelligence. And it's upgraded and keeps abreast of our human needs in every culture and every epoch. If I'm sitting having a glass of wine with Homer and it's 800 BC and I'm visiting Troy, it's the same sunshine shining down on us. It's just a later effulgence of it. And if I'm sitting with Muhammad in Mecca discussing his latest verses that he's downloaded, it's the same sunshine as now. So the universal moral content of the Quran is universal. And this is the point that Goethe and Carlyle and Emerson and all the others picked up on. They realised that he was dealing in universal moral truths. So the important thing here is that woe to those that deal in fraud. Now, the other thing I've done recently, as you probably know, is I had a historical conference on 9/11, and I attended various conferences to do with Afghanistan the West's response to 9/11. It seems to me that all that was pretty fraudulent. I mean, I suspend judgment, but I think the story that, Bin Laden and the merry band of Al-Qaeda brought down the Twin Towers in the Building 7 is just obviously nonsense. We know, scientists and engineers have told us, these were brought down by internal demolition. And I suspend judgment on how or who or why, and that's the point of setting up the International Historical Commission into 9/11. That's what I've been busy doing in my academic peace work, because we have to get to the truth of this. How can we hope to end fraud on the planet except by exposing the lies? I'm motivated by exactly the same motivation that inspired Herodotus to found history as a discipline, to get to the truth. Why did the Persians and the Greeks suddenly decide to start killing each other? Well, why did the Muslims and the Americans suddenly decide? So that's the historical research I'm doing, and I think this final surah in Mecca is very interesting on that, because it's saying, look guys, if you did fraud around 9/11, if you did fraud in invading Afghanistan, if you did fraud in invading Iraq and killing myriads of countless innocent Iraqis and Arabs and children, well then you will be called to account. The Quran is the promise of God that evildoers don't get away with it. They may seem to for a while, they may seem to get away with it for a bit, but not in God's timing. And the fundamental thing about the Quran is, no, there is an afterlife. There is a judgment for each one of us individually. That's the mighty day in which each of us has to stand before the Lord of the worlds. Now that means individually we're all called to account. And so I would say to those that have done evil, that do evil, that are fraudulent, that create false information on the web, or create lies and call it history, that no, your record is actually preserved in the Sijin, which is the negative record. There's another record preserved, it goes on to say, in the Ilion. The Ilion is the record of righteous deeds that each of us have done. When we've told the truth, when we've come forward and blown the whistle, when we've done an Assange and tried to expose the evildoers, when we've done a Craig Murray and tried to expose the cruelty of the treatment of Assange, those are the people whose records are kept in Ilion. Unfortunately, the wicked people seem to have taken over and got too much power on the planet. The Mohammed bin Salmans, the Boris Johnsons. Fortunately, Trump's gone down, but he's still not in jail. Steve Bannon is still not in jail. The people that brought us Brexit are still not in jail. Those are the people whose record is in Sijin, who've lied and cheated, like Dominic Cummings, to get their power and status in society. Well, this verse, this surah, of the last of the Meccan surahs, is really interesting. It says absolutely loud and clear, these fraudsters cannot get away with it ultimately. So I do commend people to read it, and the people that are doing righteous deeds get to be in bliss on thrones of dignity, where they will command a sight of all things. Thou wilt recognize in their faces the beaming brightness of bliss. Their thirst will be slaked with pure wine, sealed. The seal thereof will be musk. And for this let those aspire who have aspirations. With it will be given a mixture of tasnim, a spring from the waters, whereof drink those nearest to God. Now this is a beautiful sequence. This is where you go if you've been a righteous person, a seeker of truth, a Herodotus, a historian, someone like Christopher Anderson,